Welcome, leaders, and thank you for joining us for week 5 of the Blueprint series, where we stop pretending leadership is about what we know and start practicing what the job actually demands under pressure. I'm David Petrone Suave, your host and the founder of Authentara, the leadership performance system built for people who hate fluff and actually love reps. Now, real quick before we jump in, I know you're probably looking at someone who may not be the face of leadership webinars that you've been on. And some of what we cover today might hit harder than you're used to, not because it's cruel, but because it's honest. If you're here to perform leadership, this won't land. But if you're here to practice it on purpose, under pressure, well, you're in the right room. If you're joining mid-series, welcome, because you're not behind. You're entering where the reps really begin. The rest of the crew's been through 4 weeks of identity work, clarity, transparency, insight, and principles. That gave us a compass. But this week, we're going to build an engine because knowing your principles doesn't mean shite if no one can see them in motion. Today, we move from beliefs to behaviors where you stop quoting leadership books and actually start running a repeatable system, one that holds under fire, one that makes feedback your fuel. Today's topic is called activated growth, the discipline of turning exposure into execution through rituals that don't flinch. You want inspiration? Open Etsy. You want a system? Strap in. Oh, and you might know we're building leadership playlists one by one. This week's soundtrack, we're adding Kendrick's Humble because that's where real growth starts when ego gets benched and the reps get real. So let's get going because, as you know, today is the day. The blueprint itself, the blueprint itself as it pops up, as the blueprint itself as it pops up, is where we're meeting today in activated growth. You see, activated growth is what I call the behavior zone entryway. In the past 4 weeks, what we've done is we've looked at ultimately how we can give purpose to who we are, build transparency and credibility with trust-based transparency, sharpen our own awareness with guided principles, and your compass that we talked about ultimately is where we've been. But today we jump into the behavior zone. That behavior zone is where you stop pretending and start practicing, where under pressure, on deadline, in front of people, you lead consistently. Here's what today is going to happen there at the bottom, right? We're going to name the real reason seasoned leaders plateau and why your brain's actually working against you in that growth. Then we're going to define active growth. It's a neuroscience-backed behavior that installs good leadership behaviors. And then you'll see what practice looks like when the failure meets rituals. And we'll leave this week like we always do, with a little bit of rhythm, with a practice that allows us to be able to transform any theory into performance. Now, not to hype the room, but this is really just to remind us that growth starts when ego shuts down. That's why we chose the track this week from Kendrick Lamar, Humble, because at the end of the day, if we're not humble, we don't necessarily understand what we're supposed to do as a leader. So here's how it shows up. You may highlight a book you never finish. You quote frameworks, you've never pressure tested them. You nod through a podcast at 1.5 to 2 times its speed and you call it development. And honestly, the worst part is you believe you're still sharp because you care. But Harvard Business School calls this the experience trap, the lie that tenure equals readiness. And the data is pretty brutal about that. Even the core research, when examined testing and performance by Roderick and Karpik, they found that passive review locks in less than 30%. 30%. But when you retrieve it and repeat it, do that real work that leaders need to do to transform, testing yourself with practice, you get over 70% retention. So caring, let's be honest, doesn't build culture. Reps do. Because when you start coasting, your team sees it. You're not leading at that point. And the moment coasting becomes culture, well, your recovery isn't weeks at that point. For you and your organization, it's probably years. So I want you to ask yourself today, thinking about this truth bomb. When's the last time you ran reps you didn't need to? When's the last time you got feedback that stung and you stayed with it anyway? When's the last time you broke a habit instead of reposting an article about it? It's not that activated growth isn't about caring. It's about caring enough that you carve out time and you choose reps when it's inconvenient, because care doesn't care how much you care. Growth cares how much you invest. So let's find a way to go ahead and repeat it. Let's find a way to go ahead and drive forward with it. You want to know why caring isn't enough? Because caring without a system is just drift with good intentions. So here's the definition of activated growth: it's the structured, intentional practice of turning exposure into execution through repeatable learning rituals. Coasting is not default. This is the tricky part. Our brain tells us to seek it. Growth has to come from design. So let's be clear. Activated growth is not a mindset. It's not an attitude. It's not a good intention. It's a behavior, a practice structured, intentional system that turns exposure into execution over time under pressure. And it's not just philosophy, it's neuroscience. See, there at the bottom is the quadrants, and it's the ages model by Rock and Ringlet. In 2013, they outlined the 4 key conditions that help to encode behavior. What we know is that it starts with attention. I hear it all the time. I'm going to go ahead and multitask. Well, let me tell you, multitasking doesn't work because it destroys retention. Focus is part of the price of change. Then there's generation. Copying is worthless. You have to learn how to apply it, reshape it, make whatever it is yours, which is core to the blueprint for us. Then there has to be emotion. You have to feel it. You have to feel it. If there's no feeling, there's no learning. So that urgency, actually that fear, that insight, those help burn it in. Desire, service, commitment, those can lock it down. Then there's spacing, because how many of us just do it once, and once is equal to never? Randomly, wow, it requires repetition over and over again, because over time, it's the only way to automate a behavior. So however you do it right. If you miss one of these 4, your learning won't stick. Miss them all, and well, you'll feel like you're growing, but nothing is changing. And that's the trap. When you coast, it's not from laziness. You coast because your system is built for exposure, not execution. Activated growth helps us flip that switch. And if you're serious about it, here's where it starts. You ritualize it, you make it visible. You build it into your week on purpose. You don't name the behavior, you give it reps to go ahead and get there. Activated growth, as we talked about, is your entryway into the behavior zone. When I wrote the book, Pirate Jokes Aren't Funny, published by Amplified Publishing Group due out this fall, I didn't write it from simply theory. I wrote it from experience. Our experiences give us a chance to prepare for our future. Experience is not always success. Sometimes it's like the one I wrote from the front seat of a rental car outside a Fortune 500 boardroom after one of the most avoidable face plants of my career. Let me tell you a little bit about that moment and how it rewired how I lead. not a theory. It was a Thursday. It was a big boardroom, Fortune 500 company. Like I said, I had slides, I had a title. I'd done this dance before, but this time I coasted. I skipped the mental reps. I didn't prepare for the objections. I assumed experience would carry me. They didn't shut me down. They just asked sharp questions, and I didn't have sharp answers. It wasn't a blow up. It was worse. It was a slow motion exposure. Not wrong, just unready. And I earned every bit of that silent, awkward fizzle that I felt in the room. Obviously, I didn't walk out of that room with a contract, but I did walk out of that room with a decision. That moment didn't just sting, it exposed the lie I'd been telling myself for years, that my skills, my experience were enough. So that Friday, I didn't just reflect, I built a rep. What I did is I built what we ended up calling my Thursday loop. So every Thursday, what I do is I name a moment that I missed or one coming up that I don't know about. I find this skill that either failed me or a skill that I'll need. I write my future word for word, a sentence, maybe a paragraph, maybe a decision, but a play that I can run and be ready to run when it happens. This isn't journaling, it's rehearsal. Without realizing I had built an ages model. Attention, I couldn't stop thinking about my failure. Generation, well, I wrote the play on how to prepare the next time. Emotion, it really burned. The failure hurts. And spacing, well, I created that Thursday loop. It's become my weekly ritual. It's what I do on Thursday. I learn. That loss of confidence, control, and credibility became the foundation of a ritual I still use today, because activated growth doesn't promise you won't fail. It promises that you'll never fail the same way twice. The boardroom bomb didn't define me, it trained me. That's the point. Growth isn't about safety. As my dad told me once, told me twice, told me 100 times, show me a human being who has conquered failure, and I'll show you a successful human being. It's all about the stretch. So let's talk performance, not potential. As my calculus teacher told me, I write about in the book, I choke on potential. But performance, if the data's there, well, when feedback happens without a structure behind it, it becomes noise. But when feedback is turned into a ritual, what happens is it becomes a fuel for you. Zanger and Folkman ran a cross industry survey where they found this: organizations with strong feedback cultures delivered 2 times the profitability of their peers and had 14.9% lower turnover. That's not soft skill sentiment. That's a competitive advantage tied directly to growth behavior that can be coached by you, the leader. And here's where it may get personal, because Google's Project Oxygen studied the habits of the most effective managers in their organization. 1 out of the 8 core leadership behaviors was number one, and that was be a good coach, not a fixer, not a hero, a coach. Coaches create space. They activate the growth of themselves, demonstrate it to others. They seek feedback with humility. They give feedback clearly. And ultimately, they build performance, not compliance. And that's really what we're looking for, right? Not the ease of comfort, but that performance that we all want to see inside of our organizations. But actually, most leaders stop at thanks for the input. They nod, they move on, never revisit it. And that's growth. And that frustrates me as an employee, because that's really feedback literature, not feedback fuel. So let's get real. You already know the loop. It's not a bandwidth. I've alluded to it. It's not burnout. We're just getting real close to naming it. It's not lack of tools as leaders, why we start to coast. It's ego. It's that quiet voice that tells us, I've got bigger things to deal with. That feedback wasn't fair. This topic doesn't apply to me anymore. I've got this. But actually, psychologist Roy Baumeister calls it an ego defense loop, a reflex that kicks in when growth threatens identity. The Arbinger Institute calls it self deception, when you unconsciously distort reality to preserve your image. And here's how it plays out: you hear a truth, you rationalize why you're right, why what you do is okay. You retreat to comfort, nothing changes, and you start the regression pattern. That goes from ego to excuses to stagnation. And here's where we want to flip it, because as we said, it's not about a mindset, it's about a ritual. And activated growth actually gives you a playbook. So, what I want you to do is think about what this playbook is here on the screen. Here's your 3-step practice breaker that helps you potentially step away from the ego trap of leadership and coast. First, name the rep you've been avoiding. So maybe there's a leadership habit you're dodging. Maybe you're supposed to or need to have a hard conversation, you're avoiding it. Maybe you're afraid to ask for feedback. Or maybe you're just one of those people who needs control and you can't let go of control. There's no shame in it, just name it. Then design a ritual. What's one repeatable action that can get over top of that you need? Maybe it's a sentence you'll rehearse, a prompt you'll journal weekly or daily, a text you'll send today. Maybe it's a music anchor. My music anchor this week, as you've seen, is ultimately by Kendrick Lamar and Humble, right? We have to find a way to cue our anchor. So I use music. But you got to find your way. Maybe it's a post-it note, but lock it in. 3 steps. Now try it right now in your mind. Try it. Go ahead. Drop one rep you've been avoiding in the chat if you dare. Maybe you've been avoiding giving upward feedback. Maybe it's delegating before you've done it. Maybe it's slowing down enough to reflect. This isn't confession. It's really about how we lead. It's how leaders practice. It lets us build a loop because we know feedback is the spark. And ultimately, if we're able to do this, we're able to perform better in front of people. So if you've been with me so far today, you've started to build your first rep in the behavior zone. But let's be honest, loops break fast. If you don't build it, it doesn't become a habit. The hard part isn't just starting it, it's sustaining it when the pressure starts to return. That's why this week matters a lot, because we have to activate our growth, and it leads us into next week where we're stepping into compassionate leadership. Not rescue, not sugarcoat, but the courage to hold people accountable and hold the space for their humanity. If activated growth builds your muscle, compassionate leadership will test your strength in the hard conversations, in the late night check-ins, in that tension between what is true and what is kind. My anchor track this week has been Humble by Kendrick Lamar. Next week, we're going to add an anchor track by Alicia Keys called Good Job. That's because most people don't need another memo. They need to be seen. They need to be named. And she reminds us, you're doing a good job, doing a good job. Don't get too down. The world needs you now. Know that you matter, yeah. But back to this week, because this week you have to build your loop. Add Humble to your growth playlist. Find a way to reset it, identify your rep, join me in the behavior zone. You can go ahead and decide that if this touched something in you today, or if it stretched you, go ahead. Find a way to join us when we start our certification on July 22nd. It's an 8-week course that ultimately kicks off and allows us to go through the reps and the practice with weekly learning rituals, blueprint-based coaching. There's going to be a cohort of leaders committed to practice, not performance. And at the end of the day, it's built on science. Every session is hardwired for behavioral activation, psychological safety, organizational performance. So if you're an organization, contact me by June 30th. We can map the gap between your leadership ideals and lived behaviors. If you're an individual, go ahead and direct message me. And the challenge this week is to post one thing that you're working on our page at Authentara. Please follow us there. Let's not wrap this up with applause. Let's cement it with practice. So go ahead, find a way. Find a way to start your practice today. And if you've been with us for 5 weeks, you know by now, this isn't about inspiration. It's really about installation of change and growth, because growth doesn't hold unless it's built in public. So here's your final challenge. Name your rep, prepare your track, post your ritual, tag Authentara, do it before Thursday, and come back next week. Come back next Tuesday to keep your edge, to keep making your playlist, to grow your community. Oh, and if the work and the practice in between stings, that means you're doing the right thing for you. That's growth. That's being real. So thanks for being here. Thanks for being real. And make today awesome because, as you know, today is the day.